Hello and welcome. My name is Paul Richards and I'm providing this explainer on Raymond Williams and the popular press. It joins the written piece that you can read and also my podcast with Professor Conboy from Sheffield University talking about Raymond Williams and the press. So this is just a short introduction to the topic really. Raymond Williams' approach to the press and to the media more generally was informed by ideas of Marx and Engels, but it evolved pretty quickly from traditional Marxist theory. So he saw the popular press in the context of how the economy was structured, people's relations to the way things were bought and sold and made, and also the existence of antagonistic social classes in our society. But as his thinking developed, he moved beyond what you might see as that traditional orthodox approach. He developed a very robust critique of the media as a force that not only reflects our society, but also shapes it. And this fueled his own political activism. So he had a series of demands throughout his life for reform of the media, particularly more democratic control and ownership of the press, for a genuinely popular democratic media enjoyed by the masses and produced by the masses. And an end to the idea that media barons should call the shots, that advertisers should have power over what people see and hear, and instead the idea that these things could be owned, for example, by workers' cooperatives. So he was a social activist as well as a political thinker and writer in this regard, as in so many others. He coined a term, cultural materialism, and the idea of this that was that not only did the media sort of form part of this social structure that he described, he said that it actually, and I quote, he believed in the centrality of language and communications as formative social forces. So he saw it as much more important than simply just floating above us all in sort of a vague cultural way, but actually as something fundamental to the economic and social force of the country. Um, Raymond Williams, as you know, elevated popular culture to mean everything we say, write, and do, and the media was an essential element of human development and progress. Absolutely worthy of his research and understanding, and a central tool, as he saw it, of forging a new democratic, classless, and egalitarian society. He took a very long view of history, going back to the formation of the printing press and even earlier, and he saw this sweep of history and the development of the popular press in that sort of broad historical view. And this, I think, led to his absolute desire for media reform and his conviction that the concentration of the media into too few capitalist hands was a barrier to social progress. But he also saw the reverse was true. He said that a genuinely popular press, democratically owned and controlled, with high standards of journalism, great writing, great reporting, that could serve as a means of educating and engaging people in a vibrant democratic society. Throughout his life, he addressed these questions of media ownership and control. The very first speech he gave at the Cambridge Union in 1940 mentioned the manipulative power of advertising, the control of ownership, and also the libel laws, which favoured the rich and powerful. And he would return to these themes over and again in the next 40 years. He joined the Arts Council in the 70s. He was a founder of the Campaign for Press and Broadcasting Freedom. And he was, by the 80s, concerned with issues around the new satellite TV stations and called for their control by the public, not corporations. And his ideas were always linked to this idea of activism. He rather pessimistically put the point in The Long Revolution, his famous book, that is it all come to this, he said, in the end, that the long history of the press in Britain should reach its consummation in a declining number of newspapers, in ownership by a very few large groups, and the acceptance, varied between social groups but evidence in all, of the worst kinds of journalism. And that was his great fear, that the worst kinds of journalism had become paramount and salient, and indeed the primary way of journalism working. And certainly, of course, popular culture in the post-war era was dominated by tabloid red tops, American cinema, the elitist BBC, television commercials, and male-dominated activities like football and horse racing and the pub. And you can hear the sort of same pessimism creeping into some of the language of Aneurin Bevan in the 50s and even Attlee and so on. But I think Williams kept faith with another kind of popular culture, germinated from the seeds of institutions like the National Theatre, his beloved Workers' Education Association, the Open University, and the radical press, the co-op, the trade unions. And I think he saw that very much as the seeds of a democratic culture rather than a tabloid culture. So that's one of the main things that he talks about. I think there's an interesting thought exercise of sort of what he would say if he was around today, and what would he think about the worst sorts of journalism now. He said in a 1970 article in the Listener magazine, he talked about the idea of an electronic village, and I think that's incredibly prescient, that he was sort of almost looking forward, prefiguring perhaps the idea of a community linked through electronic media as we are now. The electronic village is where we all live. So the popular press is now online, and it's as influential as ever, despite falling newspaper sales. The barons are still with us, Rupert Murdoch, and even Rothermere is still in charge of the Daily Mail. And so the popular press is joined by new social media platforms that dominate our culture, fuel conspiracy theories, subvert our elections even, and maybe more importantly, distort our social priorities. And I think he would bring a rigor to that analysis and a warning perhaps of the dangers of that concentration of power and the debasement of culture contained within the spread of social media. On the other hand, I think he would have probably seen it as a potential tool of democracy. He wouldn't have been surprised, I don't think, when the military in Myanmar cracked down on Facebook and other platforms because of their capacity to foment resistance to oppression and to stand up to authoritarian governments. So he would have seen the potential, I think, as an eternal optimist in some of the developments in social media since his sad death. We'll never know for sure. In the meantime, we can draw on his fulsome writings on the popular press and the media, and we can do what he, above all, would want us to do, which is to read and discuss and then think for ourselves.